Welcome to the True Crime Man's Dark Imagination YouTube channel, your source for interesting and factual crime. Please like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can stay up to date on any future programs.
On December 22, 1924, authorities in Münsterberg, Germany went to the jail cell of a suspected murderer and found him hanging from one of the rafters in the room. This man, known as the Cannibal of Ziebice, terrorized Eastern Europe, and for years his crimes and existence remained a mystery until just recently. The man found dead in his cell was known as Karl Denke, a native of one of the small Silesian villages. His father was a well-to-do farmer. Denke was not a very good student, and at the age of 12 ran away from home. Soon thereafter, Denke found himself apprenticed as a gardener. When the young man was 25, his father passed away, and his brother took over their father's farm. But Denke received a small inheritance from his father's estate, where he took the proceeds and purchased a small farm for himself in Ziebice. After a certain amount of time, Denke proved to be a failure at farming. He found himself having to sell his land and then purchasing a small house with a shed located on Stowawa Street in Ziebice, in Silesia. But after World War I, with the onslaught of a debilitating inflation, Denke lost most of the proceeds he received from his inheritance, and after he purchased his new residence. Denke lost the residence due to tax problems, but continued to rent the apartment on the ground floor on the right side of the same house, and 2 extra rooms starting in 1921. From all accounts, Denke led a pretty decent life and maintained a decent reputation amongst the citizenry of the small town of 8,000 people. Additionally, Denke seemed to lead a very low-class but dignified lifestyle, helping beggars, allowing them to stay overnight in his apartment. Furthermore, Denke played the organ at his local church and carried crosses for local funerals. At these solemn events, Denke came into contact with vagrants and migrants coming through the town. He would find them places to stay for the night before allegedly sending them on their way. It has been estimated that as many as 40 migrants stayed at the older man's abode before leaving the town, never to be seen again. Because of his benevolent behavior, the police granted Denke a vending license to make some more money. From then on, he sold leather suspenders, belts, shoes, and shoelaces. Denke also sold jars of pickled pork for people to eat. What the police did not realize is that the products Denke sold held a bloody and grisly secret. At first, Denke seemed to be very kind-hearted, making the best of an economically depressed situation for everyone involved. Residents of this small town reasoned that Denke was nothing but a kindly old man that attended church. During the war, the area of Poland where Denke resided had been under the control of the Germans, and, quote, uncontrollable hyperflation made German marks virtually worthless, end quote. Desperate times called for desperate measures. So, in the eyes of historians, Denke made use of the goods he found available at the time. Denke began selling, quote, meat goods, end quote, that he packaged in neat little pickle jars. With the food shortages that ran rampant during post-World War I Germany and the surrounding European countries, his products saw a high volume in sales. People were starving and saw the local meat dealer to be somewhat of a salvation. That is, until a winter afternoon in 1924. On that day, December 21st, at approximately 1 p.m. that afternoon, a young man covered in blood ran to his local police station and claimed that Denke tried to kill him with a pickaxe. The young man, one Vincenz Oliver, was a vagrant, and Denke proved to be a fine, upstanding citizen that locals revered for his work with helping people down on their luck. And besides, Denke was a churchgoer. A doctor later confirmed that Oliver had been attacked with a sharp instrument. Begrudgingly, police finally paid a call to Denke and arrested him at his residence. When police questioned Denke at the station, he readily admitted he attacked Oliver, but only to defend the vagabond against any intrusion into his property. A few hours later, after the conclusion of the interrogation, people found Denke dead in his cell, having hanged himself with a handkerchief. Police thought the suicide odd and traveled to Denke's residence to do some investigating on their own. After all, what did they think they would find from a man so well respected in his own community? In a report issued by Friedrich Petruski, interim head of the Institute of Legal Medicine in Breslau, he exposed what authorities found. The first findings made at Denke's house during the search were bones and pieces of meat. The latter were in a salt solution found in a wooden drum. There were altogether 15 pieces with skin, 2 parts of the breast, which were strongly hairy. The torso is cut through the middle, 3 fingers above the navel. Its lateral limit is the front shoulder blade. In the piece of the anterior abdominal wall, the middle of the navel is visible. The remaining pieces belong to the side and back parts. The largest is about 40 by 20 centimeters large. Particularly striking was a very clean anus with large parts of the buttocks. The authorities provided descriptions of the meat as having a brownish-red color and felt as if, quote, the body would not have lost much blood, end quote. All indications from the discoloration of the found skin determine that the dismemberments took place after death. Because no, quote, vital reaction, end quote, took place, authorities believed that the bodies were not taken apart while alive. Some muscles from the necks and backs appeared missing, as well as parts that included the head, arms, legs, and sexual organs. When the authorities examined the stove, they noticed 3 medium-sized pots filled with a cream sauce with cooked meat partially covered with skin and human hair. Quote, the meat was pink and soft. All pieces seemed cut from the gluteal area. 1 pot had only half a portion, end quote. Police surmised that Denke must have eaten the other part before his incarceration. Police also found human flesh that appeared half-eaten and assumed, without any real evidence, that Denke must have consumed the pieces of flesh before his arrest. Police also assumed that human meat that they discovered in the Denke residence must have been sold in the, quote, pickled jars, end quote, that Denke peddled throughout the town. In concluding his report, Petruski stated, I should like to mention here that there is no evidence that Denke has ever sold the meat of his victims. All evidence has obviously been eaten. However, it seems certain that his guests, that is, the vagabonds, were offered to eat it. One of the most interesting facets to this report is that Petruski's report was written nearly a year after Denke's death. Quote, the legend of selling human meat on the market must have been widespread since the discoveries made in Münsterberg, end quote, and it must have been compelling enough for Petruski to mention it in his report. Petruski also documented in his report that in the 3rd pot, authorities found several pieces of human skin and, quote, parts of the aorta in a gelatinous mass, end quote. A bowl found on the table in the kitchen contained an amber-colored fat that appeared to be human. A later test to the product in the bowl proved negative for any human proteins. When the authorities moved to the small shed beside the residence, they discovered even more of a chamber of horrors. The investigators discovered a barrel beset full of bones that appeared cleaned of the tendons and muscles that most probably had been cooked. Additionally, 6 forearm bones had been found, leading investigators to hypothesize that at least 3 people had been murdered. A leg bone was found in the pond that Denke had dug several years before, and other bones scattered about the woods behind the residence. When the final tally became known, the investigators found 16 femurs, 2 pairs of thin bones, 6 pairs, and 2 left femurs, 15 medium-sized pieces of long bones, 4 pairs of elbow bones, 7 head of radii, 8 lower parts of the elbow, a pair of upper shin bones, a pair of lower elbows and radii, of which the extremities stayed well connected, a pair of upper arms and a pair of upper arm heads, a pair of collarbones, 2 shoulder blades, 8 heels and ankle bones, 120 toes and phalanx, 60 feet in metacarpal bones, and 5 first ribs and 150 pieces of ribs. In the forest adjacent to the house, investigators also located parts of a spine and 4 parts of a clean, dissected male pelvis, with only one side demonstrating any signs of being cut with a saw. Only one piece of a human head had been found. Because of the condition of the bones, Petruski affirmed that some of the bones were from a strong individual, while some of the other denoted a delicate bone structure. From the marks where the bones appeared to have been separated, Petruski noted that some of the marks appeared very jagged, while others appeared to have been cut with an axe or some visibly sawed at the separation point. Some of the, quote, articulations, end quote, appeared to have been made with a knife. Petruski stated, finally, that the bones he examined belonged to a total of 8 persons. Not all of the bones would be discovered until well after World War II, when new tenants took over the residence. Furthermore, Denke kept a collection of the teeth of his victims, found in a, quote, money bag and 2 tin boxes, end quote, that totaled 351. Because investigators and forensic professionals estimated that the bones of only 8 persons were found at the residence, they placed the total of victims to be much higher considering the number of teeth discovered. One of the alienists believed that the teeth, if all put together, added up to approximately 25 individuals. Some of the teeth appeared to have been taken quite easily, while others seemed to experience some sort of trauma in extraction. The only thing that authorities could not ascertain were the ages of the victims. More shockingly, and even more grotesque, appeared that even though Denke may not have eaten some of his victims, or even sold their meat, he did use human parts to make the various products that he sold, including, but not limited to, belts of human skin, suspenders from dried and leathered tendons, and even an attempt to make a hat of human skin. Some of the shoelaces that he sold were made of the very tightly braided human hair. What became even more incriminating, police discovered various identification cards and the private papers of several persons. More interestingly, investigators discovered several loose pieces of paper where Denke had apparently written the names of his victims with the dates he murdered them in column form. The identification cards found in Denke's room matched most of the names on the list he kept, leading police to strongly surmise that these were the victims. Denke even mentioned in the list the weight of the victim and the manner in which he dismembered their bodies. To accomplish this tearing apart of human lives, the authorities discovered 3 axes, a large wood saw, a tree saw, a pickaxe, and 3 very sharp knives. Each of the weapons later confirmed the presence of human blood. Petruski later documented what he discovered about Denke's life and sensed that people thought the old man strange as he sought solitary confinement for himself with a certain sexual indifference, and some speculated that he was, quote, neither man nor woman, end quote. Family members described him as gluttonous whenever he attended a family gathering, which was rare, and even then he consumed large quantities of meat at one sitting. Even though he exhibited this type of excessive eating behavior, people who claimed to know him stated that he had, quote, good manners, humble behavior, and occasional charity, end quote, which earned him the nickname of, quote, Father Denke, end quote. Investigators and later historians hypothesized that Denke, who failed at farming and anything else, found a way to maintain a steady supply of food through murdering and dismembering those members of society that no one seemed to care for and who would never be missed, while, at the same time, appearing to be a caring individual who sought to help his fellow man. But one must ask the question, how could this man carry on this torture and dismemberment chamber for over 15 years without even the slightest bit of suspicion? It had been documented that several complaints lodged by Denke's neighbors told of a horrifying odor coming from his living quarters. Police later learned that 2 men escaped from Denke's clutches before Oliver ran for his life, accusing the old man of a fiendish act. And Denke exhibited such strange behavior that it is simply unthinkable how he would not have been captured sooner. After all, it is impossible that he could not have been seen carrying large bags from his residence into the woods, considering that is where investigators discovered most of the bones. One theory suggests that perhaps the townspeople knew or strongly suspected Denke's nocturnal habits, as they often heard sawing and cutting in the middle of the night. It's just that as long as none of the town's inhabitants were added to the long list of victims, they considered themselves safe. The story of Karl Denke had thought to have been lost for over 5 decades, until a librarian by the name of Lucina Biali found the story in an archive and decided to resurrect it. Several of Denke's implements now sit in a local museum located in Ziebice in a small exhibit. Although this appears to be the only thing that the small Silesia town is famous for, it hardly seems apropos to advertise one's popularity as the town that had its own serial killer / cannibal. Until next time.
If you enjoyed our presentation of true crime, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to receive notifications on any future programs.